In the early portion of my strategic management consulting work, I overemphasize the importance most of the time to myself around this framework or that systematic approach when helping CPG companies achieve their goals. Maybe I can chalk that up to just being younger me, still being way too close to this business school academia mindset, or maybe back then I just wasn't able to see the forest for the trees. Because all those spreadsheets filled with data, all those metrics created, and all of those strategic plans and recommendations weren't just words or numbers, but human behavior. And it took me a few years, but I've now fully embraced that my business superpower isn't just that legacy mechanical strategic thinking, but understanding how evolving human needs drive consumer decisions and how those demand drivers can be connected to key aspects commercially impacting different CPG product categories. But others are just kind of wired differently. Understanding early that placing humans at the center of every aspect will make the biggest impact within the CPG industry. That's why I was super excited to chat with Josh Wand, founder of Force Brands and general partner at the Family Fund. Because while we share the same first name, we have diverse perspectives that make for great holistic insights. This conversation was really fun, spanning how human led and centered CPG brands are the future, how AI is hurting and maybe kind of helping CPG brands, and why every leader needs to be looking at human performance beyond basic productivity metrics and KPIs. We also talked about the transparency paradox that could be creating an under the radar downside risk for CPG brands. And then finally, we talked about where the long term biggest impact can come from the CPG focused venture capitalist firms. But these are just some of the interesting topics we chatted about in this episode. So without further delay, here is the recent conversation I had with my good friend, Josh Wand. So, Josh, is kind of first off, thanks for taking time out of your schedule. I know you've been kind of busy lately.
My pleasure, man. This is the type of stuff I love to do, so I appreciate you hosting me.
Yeah, and I was thinking, out of all the dozens of guests that I've had, I don't think I've ever had another Josh, which is, I don't know, it's not weird, but it's also, there's a lot of us, and I probably should have had more of them. I probably should just create a podcast like the podcast of Josh. I don't know.
Well, I'll join anytime, man. Yes. I don't think I've been on a podcast with a host that was named Josh either. So it's a first for both of us.
All right, good. Yeah. So, other than us both being Josh's, I think about this, and I was laughing in my own head. Sometimes I do that quite often, is that like, there's a lot riding on this conversation, mostly because I don't know if you remember this like classic movie, but in Office Space, and like there was these strategic management consultants that kind of come in, and a lot of people I think have an idea of like them, me, my profession, in the sense that we like are cutting jobs, we're cutting costs, we're doing anything that, especially when it is something in regard to like organizational structure. And I'm like, that's definitely not me whatsoever. And hopefully through this conversation, like we can get to, humanistic, people, like what's driving the CPG and why I think it's important for you and I to talk, because I think it's like we both run, businesses, and we're definitely not on the same wavelength. Like, I don't want anybody to think like I'm putting myself on a pedestal like you, but it's one of those things where like,
I'm not on a pedestal. Yeah. I'm just walking on the ground just like you, man, with 2 kids and a wife, and
when we do like the like valuable content in my, like I can't. It's not so much like telling people like how I do what I do. I think it's more of like my domain expertise. In the same sense, like we can obviously talk about how to build the business that you're building in, but I'd argue most people are probably more interested in like the domain expertise that you have, that intersection between, if it's people, human capital, CPG, the category, like all of that. That's, I would argue, where the audience cares most about, just like the type of stuff that I talk about. Like they don't care about how to build a consultancy or something like that. So this conversation, I think, is going to be, super exciting overall.
Well, I appreciate that, man. And I think sometimes consultancies get bad raps just because of the sheer naming of the structure, consultancy, or same like headhunter. My friend Scott Norton from Sir Kensington said, what's so interesting? Y'all aren't headhunters, you're heart hunters. And so what you do in consulting is like, yes, of course I have to eliminate costs. Yes, I have to make the company more lean, but you're dealing with people to make them more efficient, to optimize in the hopes of growth. And with growth becomes more people and more job opportunities. So that changes. It's so essential, and it's not a scary thing. It can be when it's happening to you. But when you're working, because anything that's unknown, just like when your children and your parents say, hey, you got to do this thing, it's scary, but that's the learning and it's the growth. And I think what you do is admirable, man. It's hard, and you do it, in the spirit of helping companies grow, which creates more opportunity, which is awesome.
Yeah. And we were talking off camera about some of our childhood and a lot of, all kinds of different things that I'm sure people would have loved if we hit record on that. But I was thinking another like kind of book that I read early on in my, I think it was college when it came out, a Malcolm Gladwell book. But like there was, I think The Tipping Point. Most people probably at this point have read it, but there's this idea of connectors. I think they also talked about like mavens and salespeople. I always thought of myself, at least initially in my head, I was like, I'm a connector, but reality is I'm a maven. It's one of those things where like ideas and information probably more than, people or humans. Like I'd imagine when somebody's talking or you're talking about, whatever, you're generally saying like the human, aspect of the team that, you're talking about the Rolodex in your head of like, oh, I should connect you with this person, or, oh, I have this person, like that's just like so natural to you. Where in my mind, I'm thinking about like all these like patterns and sequences of like information and data and whatever. But though what I just said about like, let's not talk about, force brands and like how to build that, I do think it's important to understand that like the idea of where you started and like just necessarily like connecting people and like seeing that opportunity is important, because regardless if it's matchmaking or like you said, headhunting or whatever, that like you should keep your head up and understand that there's a lot of opportunities around you. And sometimes it just kind of presents itself in odd ways.
Yeah, it sure does, man. The universe has a really interesting way of serving it up. And, my father-in-law always says, it's funny, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And it's, one of those things where, to your point, information and systems and the way you index things, that's a superpower of yours. You've probably done that since you were a kid, right? And you get this muscle and it gets stronger and there's reps and all of a sudden you strengthen and you realize, oh my God, this is hugely powerful. Same for me. It's like, it took me a while to figure out that like I could have a career doing something that I deeply love, which is authentically in me. And I was just with my mom in Atlanta this weekend. She's almost 80. And she's saying, honey, when you were really young, because she like doesn't even know what I do for a living. So she's like, what is that thing again? I see it on the social media. It's the cutest thing. She just wants me to be successful. And she knows it's a representation of my spirit, who I am. She said, when you were little, I always knew you'd be okay because you said, Mom, no matter what, I'll figure it out. Because if I don't know how to do it, I'll find someone else who can do it and teach me. And that kind of empowerment is a parent to say to your kid, like, you can figure this out, ask for questions. It's okay not to know. Like, the less you know, the better, because the more you'll learn by putting yourself around people. And I just learned in my own world, that was something that just it came natural. And I really worked hard at it. And then I realized the power that I could, and the value, I would say, not the power, the value that I could bring to people that I deeply respected, admired, was understanding their problem, saying, I might not be able to fix that, but I know someone else that can. Or this one person might know someone else that can. And so I think helping people achieve what it is, that they're setting out to achieve, because it's a mission or it's a vision or it's just important to them. It can be a small little thing, but helping others really matters, man. And I deeply, that's how I built my business. Not because I could do it alone. So you can think of it two ways. One, doing it for others it became a business, but then for myself, like surround myself with great people that are really smarter than I am, that have functional expertise in areas that I do not, sales or marketing or finance or operations or recruitment, and give them the power to make decisions. But you do that when you see pattern recognition, when you work with, hundreds of entrepreneurs, started off with 2 and then dozens and then more than that, you see what works and what doesn't work. And so that really is a gift to be able to do that every day, I believe.
And when I think about, I guess, people as a whole, we talk about the categories that both you and I spend a lot of time in CPG. And I think it's, food beverage. I do a lot of supplement stuff, which I don't think necessarily health and wellness, but I think you guys maybe don't spend a ton of time in that weird fragmented world of
I actually
of
do.
supplements.
Yeah. I mean, you name it, health supplements. I mean, especially through our fund. I mean, we work with tons of supplement brands. Vitamin nutrition, health, wellness, beauty, personal care, pet. So I think there's a practice. It started in beverage, then went to food, then we launched Beauty Force, then we launched Pet Force, then we launched Herb Force, which is cannabis, and now we do. I would say supplements and wellness is probably in excess of 30% of our business now, because it's just people care deeply about what they put in their body.
And I think this is, I guess it's an opportunity for me, again, going back to, I think about all the content that I create. And a lot of times it comes down to, if there's these demand drivers or these strategic frameworks or trends or things that I'm seeing, and I speak about them in these like commercial terms, and I kind of put these dollar amounts down there because maybe it's the language that I talk. And what I don't probably do a great job at is mentioning like the people. That's such an important part of like the CPG industry as a whole. Even when I say something like, the strategic narrative is arguably one of the most important parts of this whole thing. And I'll talk about it being both externally important and internally important. Like when I mention those things, I kind of just blank over the thought of like, it's extremely important for people to understand, I guess, how organizations have changed a lot recently. Like it used to be when I went through business school, it was profit seeking only. It was like, financially driven. Corporations were there to do those types of things. And I think over the last couple of years, that definition has diversified a little bit towards like, how do we think about the human aspect of this? Not only just, our employees, but like our suppliers. Let's think about the suppliers. Let's think about, all these kind of different layers. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, like, humans are at every level of this, and like they have to be thought of in it as a support way over just they are a metric, they are some productivity element, they're whatever. Ultimately, that's where the difference gets made. It's just that I think a lot of times we get caught up in, at least I get caught up in the clouds of some of these things and don't like distill it down to the human element of it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's so interesting, and it's like, for those that go deep into this personal work, whether it's in, kind of like cohorts or like kind of like the Insurgent Brands Network that we're doing with Bain, or whether YPO, or just whether it's just, getting together with other founders and thought leaders, not just founders. It all boils down to people. And so, when you get vulnerable and you say, oh, what are the hardest things that we're doing? All these initiatives, whether it's the strategic narrative driven by people, whether it's financial operations driven by people, where it's supply chain, production, manufacturing, logistics, people, whether it's omni-channel distribution strategy, people. And so it's so easy to say that, oh my God, we've got this thing and the people don't matter. But anyone that's really good, leader, a really good operator that's been through these journeys, that have built incredible teams, that if they're entrepreneurial, have gone through that journey of, potentially exiting, if that is their vision. That's not always the case. Sometimes you want to hold a business that can last a lifetime, and that's amazing too. But it all boils down to people at certain inflection points of the business and being really clear about getting out of your own way and giving them decision rights and understanding what that means in each specific function. And I think, building a business of 5 million is much different than 20, which is much different skill set to 100, and some can go along for the journey. And having a $500 million P&L or a $2 billion P&L, different skill sets. But everyone will tell you the biggest problems they have are related to people, and the biggest wins they have are related to people. If you're going to come up with a new innovation strategy, God knows you can leverage AI, but it sure does take people to drive that. So I think when we get more human, I think in this kind of like AI digital transformation world, which by the way, we harness deeply. And I very much believe that it's going to be powerful in a lot of positive ways, but kind of human connection, emotional intelligence, the ability to work well with people respectfully to solve problems. That social capital is more important than ever right now. Because a lot of these other things are becoming commoditized, and people that connect with people, that help people, that can drive change in organizations, that can be a line level, early stage employee, or that can be a founder, an advisor, a consultant, if you call it that, a board member. All of these people that can figure out how to help lift businesses, that can get in the roles that are most impactful for them, typically can help the business if the business needs something like that. So I think it's something we got to really talk about, because whenever you talk to people leading companies, the problems are people and money.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's it. We don't have enough money, and we need money so we can have people to solve the problems and to buy products. So, like, let's be real about what a company is. A company is a composition of humans. If it's just one person doing a thing, good luck doing the thing. So, it's just getting a little more human about checking our egos at the door. Ideas are nothing without execution. Nothing. There's a lot. I tell my boys that all the time. I'm like, great idea. How are you going to do it?
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy to think, like, the more that we get, I guess, technologically advanced, the more that we seem to get distanced from this idea of, the human being at the center of everything. Because even when, you're talking about, the organizational elements, like, again, I think that's always a big key issue. Like, you don't have the right person, you're trying to find that, or you're trying to find, there's all this kind of, like, the workforce in general is always going to be an important part, but also even, like, people have detached themselves from, like, metrics in the e-com world, where they have, a certain financial or profitability, a ROAS or a CAC, or and they have these, like, metrics in their mind, and they've lost the idea of, like, what is that measuring to the customer, to the human, and then, like, what's driving that over that. It's just a metric that we're managing, and we have forgotten that ultimately has some probably customer experience element to that. It has something, like, there's all the, like, messy human stuff that people seem to be trying to get away from. You mentioned, like, AI. That's another one that, like, oh, that's the savior of us not having to have as many employees, or even, have to even think as humans sometimes. Like, I always, laugh, because I'll get involved with companies, and they will, start talking about all these different kind of AI tools that they're using. And I think from the power in which that will bring us, and how that will be such a tool that's important to us, great. But I think in the short term and the immediate term, where we're at right now, a lot of people are defaulting to this machine and losing this idea that, like, we are no longer, like, cultivating, I think, those, like, human capabilities that are, like, distinct to us, like the creativities, the curiosity, like the stuff that, like, ultimately I think pushes businesses forward.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, like, let's have them think for us. Let's have them write for us. Let's have them, like, there's so many different applications, but a lot of it comes down to, like, we don't want to do the messy stuff anymore. So let's plug it into this machine, and, like, let's hope that degenerative AI pushes it out.
Yeah, and by the way, all that's table stakes. I mean,
Yeah.
It's great. It's great for tracking data analytics, business intelligence, but a brand isn't packaging. Brand's a promise, and in how your customers receive it. Without your customers receiving it and have emotional connection to it, and loyalty and repeat purchasing, it doesn't exist. And yes, you can track it, but if you take your eye off of that connection, you don't become a kind. You don't become a Vital Proteins, right? You don't become a Justin's. Because if you lose touch with the reality, then you're not going to have that brand affinity. So I think it's really a combination, and I think those are just examples of brands that did it beautifully. And I think that you've got to really look at how performance growth marketing coincides with brand marketing, and with social, and with field, and with trade, and most importantly with your sales organization, and how it can become one cohesive strategy, so your customers don't know you're trying to sell them things, that you just find them in all the right places, and they deeply believe in what it is that you're providing them and their families. And that, to your point, you lose those soft skills. You lose the ability to connect there. Your business will decline, and you might see artificial spikes. But I feel you, and I think that that's also, every brand's got its own kind of mission, and very often data analytics can drive the whole strategy, and that's fine if that is exactly what you set out to build. But if you want to build, the next Orgain, like Andrew, that takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And a lot of amazing humans supporting him, along the journey. And it becomes so deeply a part of you and your customers and the affinity. So that's a very human approach.
And you mentioned kind of the difficulty across all the different levels, or even, the field to the internal kind of corporate staff, again, even suppliers or even third parties like myself or whatever. I think the last, handful of years or so, and it's accelerated probably because of what happened during 2020, was that a lot of this remote, I think you guys are remote mostly on your on ForceBrands. So like
we used to have 3 offices, and now we don't tell anyone which office they have to go in. They can just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you have that, but you also have, I think, with the global workforce, people across different time zones and different cultures and different things like that. And then I think about the difficulty of building a team culture or building a company culture in that environment, and kind of applying the old way of thinking of that, one size fits all, or, everybody needs to kind of go into this direction. Because I do think there's a little bit of like this idea of like, how do you create like this inclusive or kind of supporting space for a number of different people to kind of like, give them the autonomy to be able to do these different things across, if it's culture, geographic, whatever. And like, how does that then, filter up to a, I guess an umbrella one? I think about it in a term of like, of strategy, where you go, okay, I want to be like a global brand that has these standards, but I do want to be localized in a lot of senses. I want to have that ability to flex and be able to understand and appreciate all the nuances, because I think as those ideas get brought forward, or those passionate people get brought forward, that ultimately creates a much stronger, idea, a much stronger anything ultimately, because you get the right people in there and you get the right, kind of voices. But I think if you try to blanket everything in today's world, this one size fits all, it struggles. But I do think people love this idea of the simplicity of the, one size fits all, but they don't realize that by building the organizations the way they are now, they're actually creating a lot of complexity and nuance that needs to be considered when they are building their culture.
Great point. It's a real challenge. And to your point, there is no one size fits all way to do it. And it's really interesting when you have an organization, people that have the kind of that institutional knowledge, that legacy knowledge, if you will. What are you drinking, by the way?
That is a C4 Energy Starburst.
Oh, Starburst. Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm always interested in what people are drinking. I see this kind of this kind of foundational knowledge of people that have been there. Some people that have been with the company for 5, 7, 10 years have this kind of integrity that is really important, the sanctity to protect. And then, they might have been in an office, and now some companies are now remote. And then you start to bring in other leaders and kind of people that might be at a management level or might be at a coordination level. And when you're hired as a new team member, from my experience, seeing this across, swath, many different companies, including ours, it's very difficult to get indoctrinated and to feel part of something when you're working out of an apartment on a sofa or going into a coffee shop every day and you don't meet anyone. And, you're expected to be on a Zoom call. And then you have these in-between moments where you don't actually understand what you just heard on the Zoom call. And then you're going to call your boss. They're just going to be like, hey, what did that mean? Like, a lot of people don't want to do that. Opposed to walk into the subway or walk in to grab a cup of coffee and say, hey, can you explain that to me? I'd really like to better understand that. And so, I think that, to your point, to humanize, localizing is important. Spending time with your local teams and spending time with your global group is critically important. I just brought in a partner at Force who's kind of leading the charge for the next chapter of growth, who's amazing. And he is going to every single market to spend time with people individually, just to get to know them, just to understand what makes them tick, to know where the magic is and understand where they want to excel professionally. Because I believe the best ideas don't come from C-level executives. The best ideas come from the people that are customer facing, or they're doing specific jobs that are very important to the company, that see things that no one else sees. And so if you're not able to collate that information, like you used to be able to do if you're in an office every day. And lots of companies are going back to offices. That's amazing. It's very hard to do with sales teams because sales teams are distributed. A lot of marketing teams are distributed. But if you can make a conscious effort to bring them together to do real vision work, real strategy work inclusively, really explain career tracks, understand where they want to go and how that plays with the organization, and involve them deeply in the game plan that needs to be executed over the next 12 to 24 months. Whether you're doing that between four walls or you're doing that, visiting in multiple markets, it's okay. You just got to do it. You got to do it well. And I've learned there were years we did it really well, and there's years we didn't do it well. And now we're really understand the importance of doing it better than ever. And I had to, bring someone in that was really good at doing things that maybe I had blind spots with. And I see this with a lot of orgs. So if they hit, kind of a roadblock, or if they're going over a speed bump, it's like calling guys like you. Like, what do I do? Like, how do I think about this? Like, I got to think about my org strategy. I've got to think about the challenges and the vulnerabilities. Like, so much of what we do at Force specifically, or at Family Fund, is just talk about org design. Like, let's talk about where the business is now, where you want to go, and the delta in between, and the gaps and the spots in which you are pretty well aware, if you laid this out, would help you achieve this. And a lot of times it's getting out of the way in certain areas, not trying to control everything, but having controls in place for everything is a business. And usually founders, CEOs, whether or not they're founders, are usually 80% there, but there's that 20%. It's like, oh man, if I just have fresh perspective. So very often bringing in strategists, consultants can help a great deal, because I think the world is going, it's not just full-time now. It's, clearly, it's this ability to bring in strategic partners and contingency workforces to work on really meaningful projects. That is a special thing that we have. And you gotta make sure that you keep yourself on track, and you have goals that you're looking to achieve with your partners, and treat your partners and your vendors and your UPS driver and your insurance broker and, your HR partners like team members. Everyone's a team member. If they care about you and they feel respected and they feel included, they're going to go above and beyond and do amazing work for you if they're really good. If not, no one's going to want to engage. So everything is human. And I just believe that, I don't care if it's someone just selling you a printer. Make them understand what you do and make them want to help, and see how you can help them. It all adds up.
Yeah, I was, thinking about something I said earlier, and then in kind of what you're mentioning now is like, a lot of the founders, I think, depending on, which stage they're at, or maybe also just maybe their self-awareness around what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy. And a lot of those things kind of come up in the conversation around like, okay, there's a cost element to maybe having a workforce that's in, as an example, maybe like Southeast Asia or something like that. And you have some digital team members, you have all these kind of things there, and you're doing it because maybe it makes sense to the profitability model, or just like how that makes sense in the sense of like, how do you make the cost structure work? And then eventually you come across this decision where if you're going to continue to scale, you are going to have to embrace the complexity that goes along with doing those or making those decisions. Because yes, from maybe a cost side, it's better to have a team here, or, don't have an office, or don't, like all these types of things. But then for you to build that rocket ship business that you want long-term and have that be attractive to, an acquirer, if that's a strategic or whatever it is, like you're going to have to do the messy stuff, which I think a lot of times people, when they make those decisions in the front end, they don't realize the back end. And you were kind of mentioning around, I think about that strategic alignment of like, all these things have to be, understood, because when you do one thing, it's going to either throw off another thing or not. So like when you're talking about any of the humans across any of the layers, like they all have to be in this string that makes sense. And if they are as tight as they can, and everybody's, kind of, then it's going to be great. And you're going to be, if it's an investment from your guys' standpoint on the VC, kind of side, or even from an exit, like those are the things you look at. So those are the things that you try to like decipher, because it's one thing for a business to find, some arbitrage or some like, quick product market fit or something that like, hits them in that first stride. There's another thing that's going to get them to like that next level and that next level. And a lot of times I'd argue it's probably the messiness of humans, or just the decisions they make and how those eventually come to become a human problem that maybe a lot of the founders don't know if they signed up for. And then it comes into maybe another part of your, kind of services overall is like, it's okay to not run your business forever. It's okay to look at, that business that you're running now and go, I don't know if I'm right for it anymore. I think there's somebody else that has some better skill sets for the things that we need to drive the business forward. And I maybe are better off being the innovation person or the salesperson, or I want to be a doer. I don't want to be the person that's like, running every aspect of building out these complex human cultural things or whatever it is. And I would argue that it takes maybe a special person sometimes to like distance themselves from that and what's best for the business long term.
Well, the only constant is change. And, I believe it took me a while. I'm 47 now. So having gone through, multiple businesses and learning a lot and falling my face and getting right back up, it always makes you stronger, every experience. And we realize is like, it's really important that the business doesn't define you, even though it's a creation of yours. And it is, ideated by you, and it's kind of within you, and now it's living and breathing this world. It is when it becomes your identity and everything you represent, that can be a very dangerous thing. And what I mean by that is it can be a dangerous thing because every speed bump, every challenge, every problem, you internalize it and can make you sick. And it's also the difference between you working for the business or the business working for you. And when you have a business that's thriving, that's really growing, those who create it very often develop systems that are wonderful early on. But those systems need to be recalibrated and fine-tuned and optimized. And very often you find this creator that's superhuman and they can do all of it. And they can bring amazing people around them. And sometimes you find founders or, or creators or partners that launch and say, listen, actually, I don't know how to do this. But I want to be deeply involved because I do want to do product innovation, or I do want to be in charge of the mission, or I'm Justin Golden. I want to bring in, a Peter Burns to run Justin's because I know that I'm better off if he's the type of guy that runs that because he knows this, this chapter, and he's got a playbook. And so as you look at that, it's okay. You actually are creating more value for your business if you know that you can no longer serve the business running everything within the business. It doesn't mean you go anywhere. If you love it, you own it and you have a lot of equity in it, and you have responsibility to yourself to be a steward of that and to stakeholders if you raise capital. But by the way, if the business doesn't work as well as you think it doesn't mean you're a failure. It does not. There's timing in life. Like, timing really matters. There's trends in life. There's macroeconomic situations that impact businesses that are totally outside of your control. The way valuations compress, the fundraising market, the debt market. But when someone aligns their value in the world with the value of their business, that can be a very dangerous thing because it's not your identity. It's a business. Whether you're making a bar or a protein drink or a cosmetics brand, or you own a dry cleaners. It's a business, to do everything you can to run it and make sure you have the right people running it, but try to find that peace of mind. I just did a panel at this event we did called Founderland about a week and a half ago, and I interviewed like Mark Ramadan from Human-Centric Kennington's and Ben Arnberg from Pet Honesty and Bill Keith from Perfect Bar, and they were all talking about this. Like, I had to take time for myself in the morning to breathe, to create space, to know that I had to show up for the business. Because if I didn't create that time for myself and for my family and for my spouse or for my kids, if I have them, then I couldn't show up for the business. Because if I let the business control me, it's much different than me coming in and helping grow that living, breathing organization. And that means bringing in other people to help. It doesn't mean necessarily a CEO, but to manage functions. So I think identity matters. And when you can unwrap it a little bit, very often the business becomes much more successful because you make decisions that aren't based on your ego, but based on the health and wellness of this operation.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm going to probably shift here for a second because there's an overarching, I guess, trend that could be looked at internally, externally. I know I tend to talk about it in so many different focal kind of areas, and it's this idea around like transparency. And again, we can going back to like the supplement world. A lot of times it's product transparency. If it's sometimes I think with traceability of supply chains, people want to get to like all the details, and you want to get down to even from like B corporations, like what are we going to do from purpose sides? How are we going to spend our money? How are we going to do all these types of things? And then like internally, you have pay transparency like being a big thing now. You have a lot of these like trackers on your email, on your mouse, on your like crazy like wearables, like depending on what kind of businesses you do, there's like all these different things that like maybe in a vacuum or how they're presented seem very positive, seem very good. You're like, oh great, I love this. But I sometimes think about, is there some downside risk to some of these things? Like, are we going too far in one direction and eventually like, there's going to be some negativity towards that? I mean, I like to think about it in a more positive lens over anything like that. But I do think some of these things maybe like is too much transparency a thing?
It depends on, it's a great question. It depends on how you look at transparency. There's transparency in health. There's transparency in data alerts on your wrist. There's transparency in ingredient decks. And then there's transparency in human behavior, and I think that it really depends on what's important to you and, what your expectation is. And I believe it's all really a good thing. It's how we process it, digest it. And so I don't necessarily have an answer there, but I would say transparency in human behavior matters. I think, I talk about this with my kids all the time, like they're learning in school, like the importance of civil discourse, and having, empathy and being able to have a conversation on both sides of the table. So they're on the same side of the table, whether or not they have the same beliefs. It's okay to offend someone, but it's not okay to threaten them, And so I think it's important to be kind and understand everyone's position. And I believe that's really important in organizations to have diversity of thoughts, because there's diversity in customers. And I believe that's what makes great organizations. When everyone thinks alike, that's not necessarily a good thing. Now, when people think alike in kindness and respect, that matters. But diversity of thought, diversity of experience and background, I believe deeply matters. And, as far as, what you mentioned with ingredients, I think transparency really matters. I think it can also be scary because people can get so obsessed by it. People get so obsessed by their 13-step protocol, and the time at which they manage their supplementation and their plunge and their workout and their protein drink and their infrared sauna and their breath work and their L-Mind sleep technology and, all of it, which is really awesome. But don't take time away from the people that matter most. I think Ben Greenfield said this so beautifully at our summit, about a week and a half ago. He was on stage and my partner, Sean Kelly, was asking like, what are the things, that you think are most important and how you stack your day? What I thought he was going to say was supplementation, have protein in the first 30 minutes of the day, like, no technology an hour before you sleep, put your red light on, all this. What he said, which was awesome, and it made like everyone in the audience really, really, really feel connected, was like, first and foremost, beginning of the day, like, give thanks to, God, whatever that means to you. God comes in many forms, but give thanks that, appreciate how much, love you have for your spouse, or your partner, if you have one. Show a lot of gratitude if you have kids. If you have kids, that really matters. Feel that. Your health, make sure you recognize that and you take care of that. And then fifth is your business. Because if you do all four of those things, if you have faith, gratitude for your spouse, your kids, and your health, everything in your business, you're going to show up in all the right ways. And that can be as a brand manager, as a supply chain manager, as someone working on a production line, or a CEO of a $600 million business. And so it was one of those things. So when you talk about transparency, I think it's very easy to get caught up in all of the products that we take, but we are a product of energy. And so spending time with ourselves to start the day and finish our day to show up puts us in a position where we can make really smart decisions and sound decisions that aren't as reactive. So I loved what he said about that. Anyway, I got on a little bit of a tangent. No. I wore a Whoop forever, man. Like for a little bit actually, and I was like, I can't. This is killing me. Like I feel like all I do is look at this freaking tracker, and it's killing me. Like I don't want to look at this thing all the time. It's not actually giving me direction. It's just giving me data. And so I took it off, and I know my workout regimen. I know what I got to eat. I understand my sleep. I know my HRV. But I personally, the transparency of having that on my wrist made me a maniac. And I did not want that. I don't like all the digital devices on me. I like to be away from digital devices a lot of the time. And so that's me. Some people, my brother-in-law lives and breathes by it. So that's cool too. So whatever works for you.
Yeah. I think about people always give me shit because I don't wear one of those Whoops or anything. And a lot of it comes down to what you just said, like, and going back to just how my brain works, like I go down rabbit holes of data and like all this kind of stuff. And like, I would be obsessing over so many different things that it would get me too caught in the details and not just in this bigger picture of, am I getting movement? Is my sleep good? Am I managing my stress? Am I making sure that my nutrition is pretty well? Am I, having good relationships with people? Like if I could cover some of those like core 5, like that to me is going to be more than better than anything. If I'm going to obsess over, I see that my whatever percentage is down 0.1 and like, cortisol stress, I'm getting like, how do I manage this? How do I get this to be better? Over just like, let's take a step back and let's get into like the more important things, which, kind of relates back to what I was mentioning. I think that people want to get so far into like the details of everything. And the trend has been, let's give more, details and data and more information to all of our employees, all of our suppliers, all of our investors, all of our wherever it is. And you get to this point where like, are all these details, like, can people decipher and understand what these details do and what are they pushing the agenda for? Like, which ones are actually the ones driving things forward? Do they know which ones they should be most focused on? Because if not, they're going to get obsessed over the wrong things. And then it's going to be the demise of themselves, because like, I think about pay transparency. And I think, okay, like there's some merits and I like that. And I like the idea of it, but I also think like you're getting caught up into the wrong short-term things. Like you should be thinking about, how do I show up the best I can? How do I make sure that I'm, better every day? And like my work, hard work, regardless if it's this employer or the next employer, or if it's somebody else noticing, if I put in my all, it's all going to work out long-term, because I know that that's my differentiation long-term over everybody else. I'm going to do the hard work instead of saying, well, I'm getting paid 1% less than this person. And then it ruins your whole mindset. It ruins your whole thing. It ruins everything like that. And that's kind of where my thought on the downside sometimes of transparency is like, you get caught up in the details too much over just thinking about, how do I improve myself over these long arcs? I always mention to people, like, I'm going to be around for the next 30 years. What can I do to make sure that each day I set myself up for success over that long haul? Because I know whatever I'm doing today is pennies compared to what I'm going to do in 30 years. So like, I have to make sure I'm setting the foundation correctly. But a lot of people, I think they think just in, the foundation of today is really the only thing I'm working towards. They get caught up in the wrong thing.
I so appreciate you saying that, man. I really, really, really do. It's just like, show up the best way that you can, and do it in a way that makes you feel good, where you're contributing. If you're contributing at a deep level that's above and beyond anyone's expectations, people are going to receive that so well, and you're going to feel so good about yourself because you're helping people. You're doing great work with other people. It's growing. And, and I believe there's, that's a really beautiful thing. And achievement matters. Earning things matters. Accomplishing things matter. And there's nothing more unhealthy than comparing yourself with others. We all do it. But to do that and say, I'm going to pull it back here because I don't feel really valued. It's like, you're actually devaluing yourself. Because like, you chose to be here. If you choose not to be here, then you have every right to go be somewhere else. We have this beauty in America. It's, we're really lucky to have this entrepreneurial culture and opportunities to work in a lot of places. Not everyone is that privileged, but those people that are employed, that have the ability to work in multiple places, like, choose wisely and do what you enjoy. And if you don't enjoy it and you don't want to be there, don't do it. Like, because that will create stress, which creates disease. And it's really, disease is disease. And you can look at your biomarkers all day long. I mean, I do. I look at them quarterly. I get my score from Life Force and Superpower. But what I really try to do is show up in the world and say, how can I give back? And I talk to our founders for Family Fund that we talk to, whether or not we invest, is like, how do you find founder health? How do you become really clear on what it is that's important to you so you can lead other people and lead organizations? And that really matters. And I think a lot of it's personal time, playing to your strength, doing things you deeply care about, learning, understanding struggle, surrounding yourself by great advisors and board members that can help you, and doing really good things for your team so they have access to this stuff. We're going to do this really cool pledge with Superpower for founder-led businesses, which is going to be announced soon, which is awesome. Take care of the people around you. But it's the worst timing for me. My dad's ill. Thank goodness he's on the other side of it. And, I'm hosting a trip next week with 10 people in Colombia with this organization, Give Power, that I'm really busy and have a lot of stuff going on. But what we're doing is going off the grid to install solar power in a village that doesn't have any power, because they are not as privileged as we do. And bringing great minds together that can turn off their electronics for 5 days. Like, how could I ever do that? There's no way I could do that. Well, you can. You control your time. And when you realize what it's like not to have power, maybe you unplug and you get plugged in and you come back with incredible power and ideas of how to help others, which end up helping the whole community, which end up building your business and creating more familial, connectivity. And so that's not to pat myself on the back. There's an organization that supports it. We're just going and hosting a trip with Give Power. But I feel like you got to do the things that fill you up and give. And if you get other people that do that together, the co-creation becomes super powerful. And to your point, if you work really hard, good things are going to happen. Work really hard on different things and stay focused on your mission, your vocation. But find your ikigai, find out what that is and how all this stuff connects, and do the shit you care about. Because if you make excuses that someone else, and you think someone else is going to do it for you, it's bullshit. No one's going to do it for you. No one has the time to worry about you. And if you think people are thinking about you, they're not. Steve Jobs always said this: go stand on a street corner, look at the 100 people across the street, and see how many of those people are thinking about you. None of them. None of them. Even your own spouses, your kids, maybe 3 seconds. They've got their own stuff going on. It doesn't mean they don't love you. So focus on what matters to you. And that's how you can positively impact this place, because we're here for a short period of time. You said, I'm going to contribute for another 30 years. That's awesome. I hope I can do that too. 30 years goes like that. Yeah. So we better enjoy it, because if we don't enjoy it, no one else is going to enjoy it for us.
Yeah. And just kind of maybe transition to the final point, because you've mentioned this a few times, the family fund. And I kind of want to, go past the idea of, everybody can go on the website and look at the investment thesis and understand which categories you guys focus on and, those types of things. But I'm always looking at it one step, I guess, further than that, in a sense of like, if it's deploying time or deploying capital or deploying whatever, like ultimately you're doing that in the sense of like, you're trying to, I guess, reshape or create some impact to a space long-term, because with some of those decisions create momentum. And I'm curious, like, how you see that. Like, how do you, like, it's one thing to be like, oh, we want to obviously make money for our limited partners and we want to, that's kind of whatever. But like, how do you go past that and think, okay, we can make any of these decisions. We want to make the decisions that are going to push this thing forward or that thing forward. Are there things in your mind that like you always hold true in that sense?
By the way, great question. So I ended up creating it and came up with the idea with my friends Sean and Kurt, because I would work with these organizations, build their teams like Vital Proteins with Kurt, and then we put people in to help run the business. And then they'd say, hey, do you want to invest? We invest a little. And then they'd say, oh yeah, if you know any other founders, maybe get some founders involved too. And so we ended up deciding to create something that was not competitive with the ecosystem, that was collaborative, and create the family fund and founder community where all of our LPs are founders. And they've gone through these journeys in supplements or food or beverage or pet or athleisure where they built successful businesses, made the mistakes, had some success. A lot of them have sold their companies to strategics. And so, yes, there's first and foremost, obviously we want to provide, outsized returns for our investors. But the real reason we do that is because we've got a founding community that can support these businesses. They have been through it, so they can lean in with founders, and everything we do is co-investment with other partners. So we just did a deal with BMG, did one with ACG, we did one with M13, we did one with Asto, we did one with Ground Force. So we follow on. We invest alongside great funds, and we say, hey, would this be of value to our community? We ask our community of founders and LPs, do you think you can help here? Do we believe in this investment thesis? Can we underwrite this appropriately? And how can we hopefully be the most value per dollar on the cap table, not because of me or Kurt because Vital Proteins or Sean because of his experience, but really because of our founder community that can lean in and support. And so I think it goes back to founders and investors saying, we want great people around the table. And so I was always in the people space, and I figured, well, if we can rally these people that have healthy balance sheets to invest in other companies that we believe are experiencing a trajectory of growth, which could be, really, really, really successful, how can we leverage that to help? And so that's what it's all about. And it's been, the portfolio construction is based on that. And we're doing our second fund now. And what I'm most deeply proud of outside investment is the people we surround ourselves with and the relationships they're building. And now there's all these businesses that are being incubated out of the family fund and founder community, and we can see them or even if we don't invest, it doesn't matter. We just want to help. We know how hard it is as founders to raise capital, because I've done that for my other businesses before, for several businesses, and it can be lonely. And if we can at least say, hey, we might not be right for this, and here's why, but here's some other family offices or some other venture capital groups or some other private equity groups that might deeply be interested. We just want to be helpful. And I think that personal approach matters because it can feel lonely. And then hopefully, we end up helping a lot of people and have some big wins. I think we're going to have hopefully a couple in the next 6 months, 9 months, but it's really fun to do it with great people. I learn from these men and women. They're doing great stuff. So I'm a sponge, man. I'm forever a student. And I took my kids were at our summit we did recently, and they went up to all these, oh my gosh, you have this coconut water, this is phase rug, you do this candy. Like, they got it. And they realized, Dad, you didn't create that. They did. I'm like, I know, go ask them questions. And so it's a special thing.
No, I love that. Well, Josh, I appreciate the time. We went all over the board and you followed me, and I really appreciate that, because I went on tangents, you went on tangents. I don't think we ever got too far off base with each other, which was most important, because this conversation is between you and I. It's just people are the fly on the wall and they get to hear it. So hopefully they got some value out of this. I did. I enjoyed it. So, that's all that matters, really.
Feelings mutual, man. I really enjoyed it. The way you navigate the conversation, just getting to spend this time together. I mean, I'm so excited to get to know you better and spend some more time, in real life, in person. But I think it's really cool, and to have this conversation, just for me, I'm flattered to be a part of it. I have so much deep admiration and respect for how you exist and show up in this ecosystem, what you've created. But to be able to do this is an honor, man. So thank you for hosting me.
But I hope you enjoyed the first principles thinking that went into my latest YouTube video. If you did, can you do me a favor by hitting that like button? That quick and free action helps YouTube know my content is worth spreading to more people. Also, we're getting really close to reaching my next subscriber goal, and it would be great if you join me on this journey. But to do that, we need to fix the fact that slightly more than 3/4 of you that are watching this video right now are not subscribed to my YouTube channel, and that hurts my feelings. Regardless, I want to thank you for giving me some of your attention and time, and I'll see you on the next one.